Great to be here. I'm Kirk Barnes, CEO of Transfer Med. I'm here with my good friend, the Emily Reiser.
Thanks, Kirk. I'm Emily Reiser, part of the Texas Medical Center team. We're looking forward to sharing our insights with you today.
Right. So, beyond the pilot trap, what VCs fund and health systems actually buy, and I'm doing my best after talking all week long. If I sound like Peter Brady, if you guys remember that, my voice is squeaking a little bit. So, Emily, I take it being at a health system with a fund, is there a shortage of innovation? Is there a shortage of people trying to pitch you to buy, to sell you their software, their biotech? Is there a shortage of things you're seeing from your perspective?
There's certainly no shortage of innovation. Speaking as someone who both invests in health tech, med tech, and biotech startups, as well as someone who partners with some of the biggest brands in healthcare, from MD Anderson, Houston Methodist, Memorial Hermann, Texas Children's, and beyond. We see so many amazing technologies, solutions that are actually solving problems, and our partners, like these health systems, implementing new tools all the time. But there's certainly more startups that are bringing new technologies forward than those that are actually successfully implementing in health systems or growing through venture funding. So hopefully we'll be able to unpack together a little bit of what makes the ones successful really grow and expand, and highlight some of the ways that for those who are struggling to really drive adoption, what some of those pitfalls can be and how to address them.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so the statistic says on average, most health systems have over 500 applications running in their system. And so through this conference, we've heard a little bit about the battle between a single point solution that very difficult to get that through a health system versus something that's a platform that has multiple applications, multiple therapeutic areas. Maybe talk about at Texas Medical Center, I don't know if you know how many applications you have in the network, but maybe talk a little bit about that.
In terms of our platform, we've seen over 400 different applications come through over the last decade. So certainly doesn't cover all of the innovation that exists, but it's on the same par here. And we definitely have seen a bit of a shift more recently from point solution driven opportunities to more platform opportunities. And we're going to talk throughout the session about some of the pressures that are driving that. It is harder to show value for a platform. The ROI timeline might be longer, but the stickiness is more powerful. And so there are trade-offs as you're maybe thinking about developing something new, really deciding between those two approaches.
But the work is still the same. So whether it's a single point or a platform, still have to go through security review, still have to go through contracting, still have to go through BAA, still have to do everything. So to go through all that work, you got to make sure it's really worth it. Has as many applications, touch points as possible, right?
There's so much work to do, and as maybe technology-driven founders, we hear a lot of frustration with the BAA process, the security assessment process, the legal and contracting process. But as we get into the mind of an enterprise health system, we are thinking about the risk that they're managing, and it is significant. The data that health systems have is a big target for cybersecurity threats. Oftentimes, if there is a data breach, it's through a third-party partner. And so if you as the person selling into enterprise healthcare don't really understand those real situations that your customer is trying to manage risk around, it can seem really frustrating to have all of these processes to go through, but they are there for a reason.
Absolutely. So speaking of the buying process, so oftentimes when we're working with startup founders, we hear, I just have to meet that one person. If you just get me an introduction to the CIO, I'm going to be good and everything is going to be, happy. But this is the reality that for selling a digital health solution, there's on average 8 to 12 stakeholders that are involved. So it's this myriad of decision makers that all have their respective pain points, that you have to talk their language, and it can be very overwhelming because you think that you have a great one meeting, But then they're like, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So maybe as you've been involved with these processes, talk about the complexity of all these different stakeholders that are involved in the buying process.
Yes, certainly as someone who brokers a lot of relationships between startups and CIOs and other leaders that are here on the slide, we hear so often, please just introduce me to the CEO, I'll promise I'll close. And that's, a real signal of a lack of understanding of the buying process that, your customers are really going to go through to us. And so exactly as Kirk mentioned, it is a really complex process with a lot of stakeholders. And the people buying are not always the people using. And so finding the right champion that hopefully is reflected here on the screen that also is really motivated to share what you're doing is a huge part of the process. But as you point out, Kirk, here on the political capital side, understanding that your champion will also need to ask for favors of all of the other people on the slide at least to get something done. And so it's making sure that your champion knows their own internal process as much as possible to make sure you're speaking to the right partner.
Yeah, we were talking about this grid of all the decision makers, and we were asking, I asked the trick question. I said, out of the 12 or so that are up here on the board, which one is most important? The one you have the strongest relationship with, because that's going to be the person that advocates for you when you're not around. Most of the buying decisions are made when you aren't present. So very rarely are the founders or the salespeople in the room when the decision is made to use your technology. And so I'd imagine you've been in those rooms where there's a committee and there's some for you, there's some against you, and very easily it can go either way. So having that great relationship with your key advocate is critical to getting things across the finish line.
And those committees usually aren't a majority vote kind of situation. It's the people with the most political capital or influence or trust, that those voices are going to be the loudest in that room. And so being really curious throughout your sales process about how, again, much your champion understands their own internal system and how much influence that the stakeholders that are on your team really have are just really critical parts of this process.
And we were talking also about most of the decision makers that you see, they aren't the one actually using the technology you're selling them, right? So, but in the buying process, on top of navigating the decision makers, you also have to navigate and get in the loop the people that are actually going to use your technology. So I have a little story for you. So at my startup, we had Johnson & Johnson was our first client. And we actually sold to all of the decision makers. This was a process to help add a technology onto their pharmaceutical product to help combat counterfeiting and illegal diversion, right? So loved it, but the process added time, it added cost, and it added waste. So who do you think was not happy about using our technology in spite of the problem that we solved? It was the people in the manufacturing facility. Because how do they get incented? Reducing time, reducing costs, reducing waste. So they basically got our deal killed. So while we got all of the decision makers to say yes, the people that actually use the technology killed our deal until we went back and we were able to convince management to loosen some of the parameters by which they're measured. But that was an early lesson learned that just because the decision makers say yes doesn't mean that the deal is going to get done if you haven't talked to the people that are closest to the problem.
Absolutely. When we speak to the CIO of one of our partner health systems who drives budget decisions, technology decisions across that system, she was really aware of the ROI that this new solution could bring, but also aware of how much resistance that they were going to see from implementing it. And so in the end, they did implement this new solution, but in a stepwise fashion. So to try to alleviate some of the early concerns that those users had and then up-level that integration as it went forward. And at the end of the day, kind of coming around a year later after they were evaluating the solution, the teams that were loud voices that were really resistant to that actually were really glad that the solution came in the end. So certainly there are CIO and related decision makers that can manage that behavior change and be a real partner to drive that solution in because it hits all those other ROI buckets that they care about. But it does take some time and iteration and, of course, the right partners to do that.
So we've talked about the buying decisions, some of the pain involved with getting so many people, as I said, a lot of cooks in the kitchen. But we also need to talk about the money. So since you actually write checks, you talked about the decline in some of the funding right now. So what is the change in the environment on raising capital, especially in healthcare innovation, which is a lot more difficult? We know we've seen how all the things that need to come into play for it to happen and get across the finish line in the health system. But as somebody that writes the check, talk about why has there been a decrease in funding?
So this is a pretty remarkable drop that we're seeing here on this slide. And the venture world is really impacted by the macro environment economic situation. And so if we go back to 2021, interest rates were virtually zero. We had free money available, so to speak. And so it was really easy to make a case that you should put some of that money into really high-risk asset classes. And so in the 2020 to 2021 era, there was a huge flux of new money that came into venture capital, and that got deployed really quickly over those 2-3 years into startups. The valuations for those deals were really high because there was so much money that was flowing into the system. And at the time, all the language to the startups from the venture capital world was just grow at all costs. The money is basically free, so we should push it into driving growth. So hire bigger teams, how fast can we convert, et cetera. As we just talked about though, Kirk, you can't force bigger teams into shorter sales cycles, into selling into enterprise health systems. And so a lot of that investment didn't really turn into growth. And that has been a big challenge. And then at the same time, across the last 5 years, we have also seen health systems get a lot more specific about vendor consolidation, a lot of pressure on their revenue, and really needing to see that ROI in at least a 1-year timeline, even better if it's 6 months. And so all these things together have really put a lot of pressure on the startups to come back to their investors to say, here's exactly how I'm going to convert these large enterprise health system customers in maybe an 18-month sales cycle, when in reality, when we're investing in a digital health company, we're probably only investing total 18 to 24 months of runway altogether. And so for those founders to make the decisions about how do I make the right investments in the team, in the sales process, in the growth, especially if I'm maybe shifting from smaller customers to larger enterprise health systems or trying to convert pilots into long-term contracts, these things are just a big challenge for the startups to manage. And the investors have just gotten a lot more clear about what they're looking for from the startups to be able to really believe that those growth curves are going to happen the way that we're told they are.
And to that point, one of the things that is on the slide is that not only are you investing in managing risk, but predictability, right? So when you're talking to founders and you see these really beautiful charts on their growth with the hockey stick and they're going to exit, like how do you punch holes in that, or what do you look at to help give you some certainty that there's a good chance that they are going to be successful in hitting that those revenue milestones?
For us specifically, we're typically looking at companies that are raising a Series A on average. And this is the point where a company is transitioning between those early pilots to those larger contracts, or from smaller customers to larger customers. And those are two really challenging gulfs to traverse, if you will. And so what we understand that that's where people are in the process, but we are looking for verifiable belief that that transition is going to happen. So we do that by talking to the customers themselves, the ones that are already using the platform. Are they really going to convert into a larger sale? Or if they already have, why did they do that? To try to understand if that can happen in a repeatable way. And we're going to try to figure out what are all of the costs that they're going to have to put into driving that growth, as well to really understand if we're funding the right plan to go after the revenue that we see.
You mean the product doesn't sell itself?
No, certainly not. People sell things to people, right?
Exactly. And to that point, many of you may be surprised to know that 70 to 90% of startups do not hit their revenue projections. So while they have these great PowerPoint presentations, the reality is there are so many factors that go into selling to a large enterprise client, or as you said, trying to get enough of the smaller ones, but even those wins may raise a flag because the investors might say, well, you got the smaller customers. Can you land a Texas Medical Center? Can you land a large health system? Can you land an Ascension and make that transition? So I imagine that's also another conversation that you have.
Absolutely. And then hiring really comes into this process. Most of the time, we're working with companies that are still driving founder-led sales, but are starting to think about or have maybe tried once so far and failed to bring on a sales leader into that process. And that is just, again, another really tough transition to manage, and one that we expect people to fail at least once. Getting the right sales leader in is such a challenge, and getting that shift from founder-led sales into sales leadership is a place where most companies stumble.
And even not only hiring the right salespeople, but making sure your message lands with the right folks. So some of the startups we work with think going out the gate, I need to sell to the CIO, or I need to sell to the IT department. But the IT department may not have the insights and inroads that are necessary for a product that has a clinical part to it. So getting a service line leader's buy-in is going to be critical. If it's operational, getting somebody on the operation side. So that's one of the things we also see is when they start out, they think, oh, I'm going to be selling, this is the data solution, and I'm going to be selling to the IT department. No, they're involved, but that's not where you should start. But that also becomes very important in you thinking that you're killing it and having this great presentation, but those aren't the people that are really your buyers, right? They're they're a cog in the wheel, but they're not part of your buyers at all.
And sometimes those do change over time. So we work with a company, we invested at Series A. They've grown tremendously since then. 5 years after we've invested, they're coming back to us and saying, hey, we have a new product launch, and it's a great fit for the chief marketing officer and their team. And let's talk about how we can, connect to more of those folks and understand what their pain points are, and if our solution can help to solve some of that, drive some top line revenue, and be a way that we build a new relationship with this health system. And so the personas that you're selling to, if you have a platform instead of a point solution, may even change over time as the product develops.
Yeah, and I love this other part about failure to follow up, and what that really means is working with really smart, talented founders that get in front of their buyer and deliver a wonderful presentation. It's compelling. They even maybe figure out the different personas and the story, and then they think, okay, well, they're just going to email me, let me know when they're going to buy, and everything else is done. Right? That is farthest from the case. Most deals, I personally say, 60% of a successful sale is in the follow-up. Right? It's the follow-up, and that's why I joking, not joking, say that founders can't sell because they don't have the time to do a lot of the follow-up that's necessary to get things across the finish line. And for some of the digital health startups that I've worked with, be very honest, we may not have been the first pick, but we were the ones that followed up, so we got the business. Right? Sometimes there's some statistics that say that more than half the deals go to the person that follow-ups first. Right? And so I kind of look at a sale in three steps. It's like the preparation, all the things you do before you get in front of the customer that makes you more effective and informed and show that you did your homework. And then it's actually what you do when you're in front of the customer, how you deliver. And we were talking about your message, understanding their pain points. We call professional polish, right? Understanding and listening. But then most of the deal gets done in all of the follow-up stuff.
100%. I think the ability to follow up and follow through is going to differentiate the ones who win from the ones who don't. And like Kirk said earlier, the decisions are being made when you're not in the room. So you're going to have that pitch, that person you pitch to is going to have to talk to other stakeholders, and they're not going to even remember to do that step unless you follow up right away and it prompts them to do that. Okay, maybe you did the first follow-up, they followed up with their stakeholders. Oh, now they have to schedule another internal meeting to bring it up with some other members of the leadership team. They're not going to remember to do that either unless you send them a nudge a week or so later to just follow up on how the process is going. It's absolutely going to separate the winners from the losers.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys remember the crime show, The First 48, and that show, it says, like, you know, if the homicide isn't solved in the first 40 hours, the likelihood of it happening drops off precipitously. So that's the rule, I think, about when a buyer asks you for something, get it to them within 48 hours, 48 to 72 hours, because after that, they have other stuff to do. You aren't the most important, believe it or not, you aren't the most important thing on their mind. They have other stuff to do. But if you can consistently follow up in a timely fashion, it really helps you get things across the finish line, right? And then, you know, we were talking about some of the other pressures on why it's difficult for startups right now. The shrinking payer margins, right? So hospitals, in spite of what we might think, are not flush with cash. They have very thin margins, and those margins are even shrinking. So what have you seen with TMC in terms of the payer margin shrinking in terms of reimbursement and things of that nature?
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of pressures and a lot of uncertainty. And so uncertainty creates environments where people are unwilling to invest into big new projects with uncertain ROIs, which is continuing to drive this conversation with those health system buyers around how soon can you show me that ROI. And because of these pressures, that timeline, that window to show ROI continues to shrink and shrink. And most of our work is with the provider side, but on the payer side too, because of the dynamics of members shifting between payers, it's got to be a year or less there as well. And so if you're building a new product or developing a new product in your portfolio, really making sure that you have a pathway to show ROI in as short of a timeline as possible is going to be critical to how you think through that product pipeline and new launches and, you know, validating those new product with your customers.
And the other part, I was skeptical to even put this up there, but I just call it the epic battle. So if you have an app that needs to be implemented and integrated into Epic, that's also another headwind that you may not be prepared for. Even though you can be implemented, you've got the roadmap done. What I found in one of the projects that I was involved with a big health system in New England is that we had internal pressures from the Epic team saying, well, that's on our roadmap. We don't need to buy that. We don't need to implement that. And so that's also why it's so important to have your advocates inside the hospital, because that easily could have killed our deal. We would have never known about it because we had all the buyers, stakeholders buy in. We talked with the users. Everybody was happy. But there was somebody on the inside that was saying, well, this is on the Epic roadmap. We don't need to buy this. And so that was a battle that was won we never even knew was played out.
We see this all the time. We see Epic be a reason why people churn. Even if Epic hasn't come out with a new product release, if it's on the horizon, it's a reason why people who are already working with a startup will actually churn out of a contract renewal because it's on the roadmap. There was the big UGM late last summer that had a ton of new features, and we saw two things. We saw late summer, not a lot of health systems were willing to move with new vendors. And then certainly a lot of those conversations did die after the UGM last summer. But then some did re-engage, because if something wasn't directly on the roadmap, then they kind of re-engaged with those potential vendors. And so it's something that even if you're already implemented into these health systems, you need to be tracking what's coming. And don't take the founder approach or the technologist approach of like, oh, well, Epic isn't going to make it as good. It doesn't matter. The Epic solution may not work as well as your solution does, but it's already incorporated into that platform that they've already purchased. And so that's not a good enough argument. You need to figure out how to adapt in that situation.
It's easy, and it's good, and it works, right? So how many in the audience have ever heard the acronym CROFT? Anybody? I thought so because I made it up for this talk. So CROFT is just an acronym to help you look at the different parts of the sales process, right? So I came from big pharma, big biotech, worked at Pfizer, Takeda, J&J, GSK. And so when I was selling, which is typically where a lot of our digital health startups will get some of their sales professionals from, very focused on the clinical part. That's what we're trained. When it's an FDA-approved product, the FDA tells you what to say, how to say it, who you can say it to, right? So in the sales process, the clinical part is it was pretty much what we get trained on. And the financial part, not so much, because we're not supposed to talk about how much money doctors can make from writing our product or using our particular medical device. But the relational part is very important, because you still need advocates to get things across the finish line. So when our digital health startups go out and try to hire sales professionals, and they pull from pharma or biotech, they have great healthcare experience, but there is a struggle because this isn't an FDA-approved product. There's no guarantee that this absolutely is going to work. And you have these other two components, the technical part, working with IT, mitigating risk, the BAA, and then the operational part, especially if it is a digital health tool that is patient-provider facing, because I'm sure you've heard that doctors like say, if you give me one more damn thing, I am going to quit. And so they do not want anything else to impede upon the relationship that they have between themselves and the patient. So,
yeah, it's super helpful to see all of these framed out like this, especially because so many technical founders are yelling on a microphone about the features and tech when they're talking to their customers and not talking about the value and how they're going to use it, just like you've laid out here. And they're underappreciating, especially the relational and financial components of this. When we evaluate companies for investment, we are trying to understand how well each company understands each item on here, as well as how deep of an integration or relationship is needed to implement successfully. For example, we work with several health tech startups that have no clinical interface or interaction at all, and that's actually something we see as an advantage, because then you are not as worried about all of the clinical users. You're also probably less worried about some regulation in some cases, and then you're also not as concerned about impeding in the brand and things like that the health systems really care about. And so certainly move the conversation to the value, to the ROI, and also as you're building, assess to what level of integration, and I don't mean Epic integration in this case, but integration into the people, into the customer segment is really needed to start to show that ROI in that first implementation.
and I jokingly say when you're presenting and sometimes you get cut off and the buyer is like, okay, this sounds great, just tell me how much it is. What's the price? How much does it cost? I'm like, that's a trap. Don't fall for it. But price is relative to the size of the problem that you're solving. And if you speak with the buyers and you do your homework, and in fact, I like to challenge my founders and even salespeople that I don't like to say that you are really selling, because selling is always, people say it's a slimy feeling, and they just don't like the word, because selling conveys, I have something that I'm trying to convince you to buy. So instead, I say, well, you are really just trying to monetize problem solving, right? if you think about monetizing problem solving, that means you actually have to get through the know, like, trust process for your buyers and those stakeholders to trust you enough to really tell you what the problem is. And by human nature, we don't want to tell people that. It's like when people ask you how you're doing, your kids may have gotten on your nerves, you had a bad day, flat tire, you're not going to tell you, like, I'm good, everything's fine. But it takes a while for you to really get through that process. So, and what's important relative to price is how you qualify the problem and then how you quantify the problem. And if you quantify the problem, that will help you paint the picture for what the ROI really looks like. And so I was going to ask you, have you seen somebody that you work with do that really well, or on the other side, people that absolutely have no idea whatsoever?
Yes, of course, to both. I think that the most universal difference between those two is that one is pitching and the other is asking questions. It's curiosity that's going to drive the trust, get your customer to talk about themselves, talk about the problem, talk about their own value, right? And get away from pitching your features, pitching the future. That's just going to lose every single time.
So when I was talking earlier about the sales process and preparing what you do face-to-face and all the follow-up, your preparation is so critical because you're only going to get 30 minutes to an hour with your buyer at a clip. And so if you show up asking questions that you could have found the answers to on this thing called the internet or ChatGPT or somebody else, it will appear like you're wasting their time. But if you show up prepared, they will really appreciate an insightful, thoughtful question that shows that you've done your homework. And that is one way to really help shorten and compress that sales cycle.
Absolutely. And if you already have a few early customers or have some great mentors that have access to the information that a health system customer cares about, use those conversations to ask the question and say, hey, we've heard that some of our other partners are really struggling with X. Is that something that's also top of mind for you? And that's a way that you can build that credibility, build that trust, and also drive directly into the real problem that they have that you're trying to solve.
And as we were talking earlier about one of the hardest transitions is we get asked sometimes, when do I hire my first salesperson? And when do I transition from founder-led sales into actually hiring a salesperson? And that is an art and science, and there's a lot that goes into it because the data shows that when that happens, there's about a 60% drop in what I call the messaging efficacy to the people you're selling to, because the founder has all the secret sauce. This is their baby. So they know it inside and out. And hiring somebody that may not know healthcare that well, may not know the stakeholders that well, may not know how to articulate my craft, right? All those different components. When they get in front of buyers, the buyers can sense that this really isn't the person I want to do business with, right? And so I was going to ask you to see when you've seen that transition, when the salesperson's hired, they're sitting across from you and trying to convince you, and you can tell the jam isn't jamming anymore.
Have way more stories of this going wrong than going right, and so it's just extremely hard to do well the first time. And you know, a buyer does like when there's a founder or CEO in the room, and so even as you're growing and as you have those sales leaders, there still might be situations where you're co-selling or really coming into the process in a meaningful way as the founder, as the CEO. But you have a sales leader to kind of really manage a lot of these other preparation processes, learning processes, et cetera. But absolutely, most people are looking for the resume, and maybe not the resume that's like a digital health company that is sold into other enterprise health system customers or whatever their target customer segment is. And unless it's really that clear and really that specific, it almost never works out the first time. And it's a huge cost to the process when that happens.
And we've seen this sometimes when founders will hire their first person. Like, mistake number one is just in the title. You do not hire a VP of sales out the gate. Like, you're going to get people that apply to be a VP of sales because they will never be a VP of sales at the company they were at before, and this is my chance. I can now get this title. And the VP of sales typically means I do strategy. Like I give you great insights, but I'm not going to make 100 calls a day. I'm not going to do all the necessary work that as a founder, you've been grinding. And so the title will even attract certain types of talent that you then have to weed through, which can be a turnoff as well. And then the other thing that I see is hiring people that have sold software. So they know software, they sold SaaS, but they don't know healthcare. And I'd imagine, Emily, that you're not going to teach people healthcare 101 when they show up in front of you trying to sell you something.
No, there are some learnings from enterprise software sales in terms of complex buying process, all of these different stakeholders to manage. But of course, it's special and different in healthcare and specific. And certainly you're trying to get specialists to really be able to be that early partner with you in this really critical transition time.
Yeah. And even in selling digital health, there's multiple markets. So if you're a digital health company and you sell to hospitals, but there's part of your solution also is applicable to payers. That's also applicable potentially to pharma, biotech, med device companies, and possibly you want to sell to the VA or to the government. Those are all completely different sales cycles, completely different stakeholders, completely different process. And so being able to have that knowledge when you're hiring somebody is so important that you're not getting somebody that they have to learn all of that. Coming to the table with some of those things is great, and especially if they have a few relationships under their belt already.
And to that point, that's why it's so hard for first-time technical founders to do it themselves too, and to figure out how to understand each of those customer segments and figure out where that product works as they're still in the early stages of driving new customers and adoption.
And in that learning process, I like to share this slide. This is where I love to talk about some of my background. So selling in pharma biotech for big corporations, many of you may not know that I actually had to pass a very rigorous set of exams before I could even get in front of a decision maker. So I had to, and I'm an econ, I am not a science person. I'm the poster child for somebody that's made a career in technology without having a technology background. But before I could get in front of a customer, I had to pass at an 85 or 90% learning the package insert of the drug I was sold. I had to learn clinical studies. I had to learn anatomy. I had to learn basics of pharmacology. And then I got into learning how to articulate that to the people that I was selling to. And so I think there's a missing rigor for how we ensure that sales professionals are really prepared before they get in front of their respective buyers.
Absolutely. I think it comes from the fact that many of the founders and some of the investors in this space came from just the enterprise software space and wanted to move as fast as possible and grow as fast as possible. But in that process, lost this rigor of sales training, and it's shown up in terms of how difficult it is for startups to figure out how to do this well. And there's a huge opportunity here to be the type of company that invests in this and that focuses on this to be able to stand out amongst the peers.
And I'd like to also say that salespeople are not magicians. You know, you just can't hire them, not provide the right training for them, and there's hope that as soon as they show up, sales are just going to happen automatically. It doesn't happen that way. So even when you do hire salespeople, you do have to check on them. You have to know what to look for. I like to use the analogy, so you make sure that you have a good prospect and not a suspect. Because salespeople can be BS artists. They like to talk, look good, smell good, sound good, but is there really substance in what they're going to do when they're in front of your customers? And they are representing you, right? And so there's a learning curve. Like, I would never want to let somebody out in the wild to go represent me, to go talk to an Emily that has the inroads to one of the largest hospital in the country. And so I'm sure you've seen some of that as well.
And it's an exactly important point that first person that you hire is building the process with you because it's not repeatable yet. And that's a completely different person than a growth leader what that is really expanding what's already working. And if you, as the founding CEO, is trying to hire that person, it's so much more important to find someone that can build the process with you than somebody that just comes in and says, oh, here's how I've driven growth across all these other, maybe even digital health startups. But if they haven't built that new process, it's not going to be that right partner.
Exactly. And so if you think about all the companies that are here selling in healthcare, all the pharma companies, biotech, med device, diagnostic, there are over 500,000 healthcare sales professionals out there. It's a lot of people. But the data says less than 5% know how to successfully navigate the complexities of selling digital health. So those are salespeople, not even talking about the founders. So this is why this topic is so passionate of mine, because we always see and celebrate who raises money, but then you've seen a lot of those companies not be around 2 to 3 years later on. And the sales part is the critical part, that once you raise money, the sales is and the revenue is going to be what keeps you in business. Right?
Absolutely. As soon as a company fundraises, they're immediately on the hook to drive certain projections of revenue growth that they've promised in order to be able to raise the next round, in order to become profitable, and in order to continue to expand adoption of their product. And so it's certainly, one of the key things that we look at is for those that are transitioning and not just expanding what's already happening, how are they going to get these right stakeholders, drive the right processes, convince us and their prospective customers that this is the right solution for them.
Yep. So I've been working on feedback from people like Emily at Texas Medical Center, other venture firms and accelerators on building like some audit tools to help us assess where startups are in terms of their go-to-market strategy. And so looking at, for example, things like if this is a patient-provider-facing app, it's going to lengthen the sales cycle, right? If it's something that's more back-end that does require the doctor and the patient, it's going to shorten the sales cycle. But there are a lot of these different metrics that we can hopefully start getting a lot of data to better predict the likelihood of if a startup is going to be successful in selling and what that sales process might look like. And so as an investor, if you have some of this kind of data, how might that help you, give you some new set of information on whether or not to invest?
It's just such a powerful tool, because without this type of tool and audit, we are having so many conversations to just try to understand where we're at with these things. So to give you an example, 2 of our different portfolio companies, one is patient-facing, patient engagement, remote patient monitoring, and another one is completely back office supply chain management. And so those 2 companies are both digital health companies that both got investment from us, but have completely different questions that we're asking on all of these different levels, and have really different likelihoods of success, therefore, and things that we care about in terms of threats from Epic, threats from other customers entering the market, et cetera. And so because there's such a variety of different companies in digital health, a tool like this is really helpful for us to figure out, okay, what are the key risks and what are the things that we need to make sure that the team is spending time on after investment to be able to convert and drive the growth that we're all trying to see.
Yep. And on top of having an auditing tool, I'm building the first digital health sales institute. And so you may not know that if you wanted to go sell a medical device, there are places you can go get certified to train. They will train you on it, and then Stryker, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, that's where they go to actually hire talent. Very similar for pharmaceuticals as well. But as we talk about the complexities of selling in digital health, there isn't anything else out there like that. And so the goal is to help develop a talent pipeline for a lot of the companies that Emily and some of the other investors and accelerators invest in. But then for our founders, I'm teaching them how to discern prospect from suspect. So how do you make sure when you have a role that you're hiring for the right title, the right responsibility, so those people can hit the ground running as quickly as possible? And all this is being built in getting a lot of the feedback from things that you're seeing so that we can help founders stay around after they raise money. We want them to be successful. We want them to be around. So we want to make sure they have access to the right talent.
100%. And hopefully it's been really clear that we have this big gap of training, of really experienced sales leaders, and we just don't have the tools and the systems right now to really empower awesome founders who are building great products and solving big, important problems. But this is such a big hurdle to actually making it happen.
Absolutely. So I know we're almost at time, but this is one of the numbers I want to leave you with. So a bad sales hire or a salesperson that doesn't work out costs about $500,000. All right, so just think about $500,000 every time a poor hiring decision is made. I was talking to my buddy, he's actually over there at Gozio Health last night. He said in the last 7 years, he's gone through 25 salespeople. And he said he believes from his numbers, it costs him between $700,000 to $1 million every time he has to let somebody go when you add salary, opportunity. He said that is, as a Series B company now, that is his biggest pain point, is making sure he has the right talent to help him get to the next level. But I think that number is always interesting because some people think, oh, well, it's just the $150,000 salary that they made, or it's really not that much. But think about the amount of money, think about the time, and think about, I always jokingly say, the bacon sizzle from your burn, just keep going no matter whether you have revenue or not. Your runway is depending upon how much revenue you're going to get to replenish the money that you're investing. And would you say how much runway do you give them when you invest typically in startups?
18 months, maybe 24 months. And that's just a huge number in a Series A company even to be burning that every time you make a sales hire that you need to hire again. And like I said earlier, that happens almost every time, at least once.
Yep. So as we wrap up, I would love to hear from you guys. We have our first information session next week. You scan the QR code and get more information. But it wouldn't be possible without a great network of people giving me feedback, because I don't, in spite of what I think, I don't know everything. So I need to have great people like Emily that really give me very honest feedback, but extremely great intelligence as an investor and also a buyer. A lot of the things that I've heard, she's been able to validate. And so thank you for being here with me. As always, sharing the stage with you is a blessing.
Likewise, Kirk. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for sharing the morning with us.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.